I was looking through the hair analysis information and testimony today. Testimony of Larry Peterson, who was the guy who was from the GBI crime lab, and he did the microscopic hair analysis back in 2001. There was a pre-trial motion to exclude Larry Peterson and any other microscopic hair analysis expert testimony pursuant to rdered, because this type of evidence has been deemed unreliable and junk science. Microscopic hair analysis contained errors in at least 90% of cases in ongoing review. So that's a lot of errors. The motion was denied in part and allowed in part, and I found this really confusing, the way that the judge explained it or wrote it on there. The state said that they weren't going to call Larry Peterson. The judge said, okay, well, that's fine. The motion will be allowed because you're not going to call him. And then it's going to be denied pursuant to rdered. So she's basically saying, yeah, it doesn't matter because it's not going to be let in. But even if it was going to be let in, I was going to let it in anyway, even though it's junk science. And as we saw at the trial, old Larry did get up on the stand, so that was a bit dodgy. I found all of this testimony really confusing, especially the way that Larry was answering Cruz's questions. What we did figure out was that all of the hairs found on the crime scene were Caucasian. There were no African American hairs found. There was a pubic hair found in Tara's left hand. Now, apparently they did have a reference sample of Chris, of a pubic hair, but what I think, and this is really confusing, that Larry just didn't want to give a straight answer. So what I think is that he compared the hair to Tara's hair and decided that they matched. So therefore, that automatically excluded anybody else. But he didn't actually look at the other ones. He just automatically excluded them. I think that's what happened. I made a spreadsheet so that I could properly understand this evidence by sort of mapping it out, and it's really confusing. So I'm not surprised that the jury obviously didn't really understand any of it. I've got the 2001 testing, which is just the Larry Peterson, which is just the hair microscopy comparison, which, as we know, is junk science, so that doesn't really matter. But then we've also got the 2007 mitochondrial DNA testing, which I've mentioned a few times. But when I looked at that stuff again, I found some other things that left me kind of questioning. So down the left here is the evidence IDs that I could gather. I noticed there was no exhibits under Exhibit 8, so 1 to 7, I don't know where they would be. In 2001, you can see that they were compared and consistent with blah-de-blah. The one that was consistent with Chris Melton in 2001 was the head hair found on the power transformer cord, which is just the cord that connects the printer to the power outlet. And I think because it's like a printer, it has maybe one of those battery pack type looking things that maybe has two cords. That was my understanding. So that was Chris's hair. There were several hairs that were unsuitable for comparison. Now we get to the 2007 DNA results. First of all, the hair that they were able to attribute, or they weren't able to exclude, so that was hair number 8. They couldn't exclude Ashley Hall or Chris Melton. And that's because they must share the maternal line DNA. That was the pubic hair that was found on Tara's behind. And then on the report, the other 2 hairs that they compared to the reference sample DNA was hair number 2 and hair number 3. So if we look back at my spreadsheet, there's no hair number 2 and hair number 3 that were presented at the trial. And if we look back to the report from 2007, hair number 2 and hair number 3, all of their reference samples were excluded. So those hairs didn't belong to anybody that was known or that they were testing for, but they were Caucasian. And do you guys remember on the swabs that there was another, at least one, I think, unidentified profile? I wonder who it could be. And why didn't they explain that properly at the trial? I do think the defence should have explained things a bit better. Sorry, Mr. Cruz, but... And the other thing is that they didn't send all of the other hairs that they had... Basically, they'd already considered them to be identified because of the 2001 testing. So consistent with Tara, consistent with Ashley, consistent with Valerie. So they didn't send those ones for DNA testing, which they really should have, because the testing in 2001, it's not reliable. The 2007 testing is mitochondrial DNA, so it's much more reliable. So it would have made more sense for them to send all of the hairs for testing so that they could either confirm or exclude them, or maybe confirm if it was somebody else's hair, like maybe Chris's. I also had some more questions when I was looking through my spreadsheet and I was looking at the pure gold forensics testing, but I will make another video about that because this one's getting a bit long. Thanks.